I'm going to say something perhaps quite controversial at the NatCon conference, which is the great enemy isn't the woke. It isn't an out-of-touch metropolitan elite per se. It isn't even a surging authoritarian China. It's quite simply the limits of our imagination. The West is stuck. It's stuck because it can't imagine the new phase of progress that possibly awaits. That is, if we can take advantage of its potential. This new phase of progress would entail one of infinite possibility and flourishing through the leveraging of mass knowledge. Instead, right now, what we're doing is we are luxuriating in dystopia. And that didn't start with Extinction Rebellion. It started with third-way liberals. The last liberal utopia that anyone came up with was in fact a dystopia, namely the end of history, a world of liberal hegemony, sort of grey, passionless world of consumerist, laboratorized happiness, where there would be nothing new to debate or discover. It's Francis Fukuyama, Alexandre Kojève, the French philosopher. Other iterations of the same theme we see right now, the climate apocalypse, the replacement of humans by AI. And I think this is a symptom of the fact that we haven't actually grasped that there's a new era of progress that does beckon. And we're not discussing what that era is and what it will take to reach it. But before I get on to that, where we need to go, I want to explore a little bit where we've been in terms of a world of flourishing based on knowledge. Because as a journalist, something that's really important to me is understanding things in terms of a story. So one of my least favorite quotes is actually by Sir Francis Bacon. Knowledge is power. It's just completely incorrect. Knowledge isn't power, knowledge is life. That is to say, knowledge is literally the life force that has driven the progress of the universe, the world, and human civilization. So the first knowledge revolution happened 14 billion years ago. That was the Big Bang. Using David Deutsch's definition of knowledge, the physicist David Deutsch, knowledge is information with causal effects. The Big Bang was arguably the first known manifestation of knowledge as a creative force. We all know the story. This tiny atom-sized ball of energy which exploded into billions of galaxies inexplicably. The mystery is why that ball of energy was somehow programmed with a kind of knowledge. It was programmed with information that would cause it to explode under certain conditions, which I find utterly fascinating. So nothing then happened in the universe for about 8 billion years. Then, 3.7 billion years ago, if that was the first knowledge revolution with the Big Bang, the second knowledge revolution happened. And that was the beginning of life on Earth. Knowledge evolving into a life force. So living things live through knowledge. That is information encoded in their DNA, which enables organisms to build and maintain themselves. The other thing that's really amazing about this second knowledge revolution is that tiny knowledge-driven entities can impact the world in huge ways. And the way bacteria sustain huge trees is a great example to this day. So let's fast forward to about 100,000 years ago when Homo sapiens developed the mean gene, which was a gene which enables humans to mimic not only behavior, but the meaning behind behavior. So this was the third knowledge revolution, because it meant for the first time human beings had the potential to create and share knowledge. This enabled us to do everything from developing and sharing very rudimentary tools to inventing religions and sharing religions and creating complex, huge-scale civilizations. Then, the fourth knowledge revolution doesn't happen until the Enlightenment, because what happens for thousands of years is that progress is incremental, because humans prefer to codify and diffuse established knowledge rather than create new knowledge continuously. That changes 18th century, 18th, 19th century, because a new culture of knowledge improvement emerges. So a culture where old knowledge can be criticized for the first time and new knowledge can be introduced. And this has driven huge progress over the last 2 centuries. But now, we seem to be stagnating, having gone through these 4 knowledge revolutions. The dawn of the computer age was supposed to usher in a new Industrial Revolution 4.0. It hasn't happened. Productivity has proved flat after initial surge in the US, which petered out about 2005. People in Britain and wider in the West are stuck in low-paid jobs. Crumbling ancien regime that operates based on the circulation of old knowledge is entrenched. We see monopolies and smaller companies alike, both not really innovating, a shrinking manufacturing base. And the knowledge economy, which is really what I'm here to talk about, that is an economic system in which production of goods and services are based principally on knowledge-intensive activities that contribute to technical and scientific innovation, so engineering, science, computer programming, severely underdeveloped, a fringe phenomenon. And that all comes down to the fact, in my opinion, that we are failing to reach the 5th knowledge revolution. Now, this knowledge revolution is really the Enlightenment on steroids. That is to say that while the first Enlightenment was an elite-driven phenomenon, the new Enlightenment can only function based on mass participation. So the Industrial Revolution came into being essentially due to an elite culture of technological improvement that flourished in the knowledge societies. The Agricultural Revolution was propelled by a managerial class of capitalist reformers and improver landlords. But it's going to take more than an elite or a small managerial caste to exploit the potential of the computer age. We effectively need to go from a world where workers were once cogs in a machine on a production line to being sparky neurons feeding into a giant company brain. That isn't what's happening. Instead, we are in danger of tipping into a new dark age of knowledge, the knowledge as power version of knowledge. We see big tech that's seeking to profit not by tapping into human beings as dynamic, active, creative agents, but as passive data farms. And they're actually destroying the creative potential within their own sectors. For all their claims about being cutting edge, we already see big tech doing that. They are taking what should be the very creative aspects of the production chain, and they are actually decreativizing them. They're routinizing them, and they're outsourcing them to the global south. And we see that with, for example, software development and content management. And the big scare factor, obviously, about AI replacing humans in the workforce, and the knowledge economy remains under a sort of vanguard. We can turn things around, but it will take a new story of progress, a new epic story. It's not, in my opinion, going to be the story about a culture war against the woke per se. I think it's got to be broader than that. If we're really going to cut through the dystopian attitude to the future that is really dominating right now, it can't just be, you cannot fight it within the framework of a culture war. It has to be a story that is magnificent, that is exhilarating, that will bring people together. But to bring it down to earth, I think that in terms of policy, for some of the politicos who are in the room, what can the right do? What should the right be thinking about now, especially looking at a potentially quite lengthy period out of power? I think, how do we build a decentralized economy that's pro-startup, pro-small business? How do we tackle the issue of monopolies? Because that really is an existential issue now. For Britain, how can we make the most of Brexit? I think some of that lies in innovation. We can see how the EU is really messing up this question of how you deal with regulation of innovation. They're very anti-innovation, and that's in terms of deregulating from the EU. That's something that we can make more of, and we should be, if Brexit isn't reversed. But also I think that the Conservatives need to think about an education revolution, because, look, we've got a quarter of people in jobs which only require primary school level education. And we have an educational system which doesn't teach people to think independently, to be creative. There's a Brazilian philosopher, Paulo Freire, and he actually compares modern education to a banking system. So teachers depositing knowledge into students passively. Students need to learn to think for themselves. And increasingly we see this atmosphere where it's actually people are not discouraged. People are not encouraged to think for themselves, and it's very, very worrying. But also teamwork as well, because that's very important in the knowledge economy. Also, the right can think about how to incorporate a story of progress through the knowledge economy into discussions of levelling up, because this levelling up has been dominated by the idea that we can level up through manufacturing, because that's a very visual thing. A politician can go to a factory, or wear a visitor jacket or whatever, and it's quite hard to describe the knowledge economy in a way that's kind of visually captivating. But I think that given that in the north, comparatively cheaper labor, comparatively cheaper land, huge potential to incorporate the knowledge economy into the levelling up, seeing as knowledge industries, those are the two most important things for them, land and people. And instead of investment hubs, that was a big thing for Liz Truss, I think we should be thinking about knowledge hubs. So not just sandboxes and startups, but also pilot schools. It needs to be far more radical, far more revolutionary. And I started with a quote that I didn't like, and I'm going to end with a quote that I do like, which is, "We know more than we can tell," by Michael Polanski. Because not only is every human being imbued with the knowledge life force, as it were, and therefore having something to give, but the very future of our civilization depends on tapping into that. Thank you.